Memory River, written and read to you by Josh Kler. Part 1. His family set up their tents and finished lighting the campfire. The 7-year-old boy was playing by the deep, flowing river, throwing pebbles at a stump on the other side. He kept missing the stump until his last one. He gave it a long wind-up and heaved with all his arm could provide. And as the rock left his hand and arched over the water, hitting its target perfectly, his foot slipped forward. Have you ever slipped on the stairs and experienced that sensation in your belly before you hit the floor? So have I, and nothing I do can prepare me for it. Nothing can prepare you for what happens next in the story. He dropped into the water and began moving fast with the current. He hit his head on a massive rock jutting out of the foamy white river. He woke on the edge of the sandy riverbank. His clothes were wet, but not soaked. His head was throbbing and dizzy. He slowly stood up and leaned against a tall tree a few paces from where he woke up. He had never seen this part of the land before. The leaves were high above him, and the sunlight hardly shone through the dense green forest ceiling, making it difficult to judge how long he had been floating downstream. After his throbbing head settled down, he began walking up the riverside for any recognition. Over an hour had passed, and nothing was familiar. The boy's mind felt shallow. His memory of slipping into the cold darkness was so vivid. But before that, where was he? He tried hard to remember things. Anything. What his mother and father's names were. He couldn't picture their faces. He knew he had a mom and dad. He knew a family and friends, and that he was nowhere near home. The problem was, he didn't have any memory of his house. Before he slipped in the river, he remembered the smell of crackling campfire and melting chocolate and marshmallows. But he couldn't recall his own name. After walking with no luck of recognition coming back to him, he decided to climb a tree and see if a broad view of the scenery would spark a memory. On the treetop, he saw the river weave its way through the forest like a giant blue snake. He saw jutting rocks standing up from the river in several locations upstream and even further down, underneath a 50 or 60-foot crashing waterfall. He watched the mist rise above in a white cloud. "Oh, I'm glad I didn't float down that far," he said with a gasp. A deer was drinking from a calm, gentle area on the river. But no humans, as far as the boy could gaze out over the hilly, wet woodland. There was no campfire smoke anywhere. He saw the tallest hill, about 2 miles away, and decided he'd hike up the incline and get an even better view of not just the possibility of people, but also a good idea for shelter placement. He got down from the tree and began his trudge. As he approached the mound, the red pines populated. He breathed in the scent, like rosemary and citrus. Squirrels jumped from oak branch to branch and squeaked to each other for who would take home the enormous walnut. A woodpecker drummed loudly on a birch tree and flew over the boy's head with long, swishing, outstretched black and white feathers. Tiny bits of pink sky and darkening blue shone through the pine needle roof. Owls started to sing around the boy as night drew in. His stomach rumbled, but his emotions were so rattled that he thought little about finding food. When he had reached the ridge's peak, the silver full moonlight burst through the treetops behind tiny white clouds, slowly moving away in the cooling night breeze. He saw the river flowing into a massive lake, but to his despair, not a single camper could be seen for miles. He sat down on the soft grass and started crying. Fear and sadness mixed with the indescribable unknown inside his heart and bruised mind. Who am I, and why can't I remember my life? Would I recognize my family if I saw them? He took a deep breath and smelled the pine in the air. He tried hard to notice as much around himself as possible, and think about it all to avoid falling back into fear and despair. The pine trees are nice. A welcoming smell. The sound of owls is relaxing, and it's comforting to listen to. At least I'm not the only living thing out here. He was certainly not the only living thing in the forest. Years back, I went camping with my younger brother Zach, our friend Logan, and my dog Vanderbilt. It was a brisk night in Michigan, and my toes felt slightly warmer than popsicles. I closed my eyes under the stars and heard a noise. Then I heard more than one noise. Then I witnessed a sound that kept me from sleep. It was the outcry of howling coyotes. That was a mix between scary and unbearable to hear. While trying to sleep, the sound of screaming coyotes is about as annoying as polka music. So I kinda hoped that the coyotes would change their tune real fast. They sang their hearts out for what seemed like all night. I eventually put my pillow over my ears and fell asleep. I forgot to mention that we had several hammock tents, and I was in one. If the choir of coyotes were hungry, it would have been easy for them to go for the thin tent hanging in a tree. When Uriah's nerves settled, he convinced himself to start finding something to eat. He walked around the hill and saw a cluster of small bushes with red dots all over them. "I recognize raspberries anywhere," he said, looking at the popular fruit with a glint in his eyes. His belly rumbled even more. Yelling, it was time for nourishment. He took his jacket off, tied the arms around each other, and put the linked arms across his shoulder and waist. He filled his makeshift pouch with as many berries as possible. He brought the berries back up the hill and needed to start thinking about shelter. For night had arrived, and the gray timber wolves would come out soon. The little boy would be an easy target, out in the open with no campfire to keep away predators. He thought it would be better to stay close to the high ground, making it easier to see bypassing hikers and vice versa. So the boy made the fastest hut he could and ripped off about a dozen branches, roughly 6 feet long. He stabbed the torn ends in the soil and layered the leaves around the tree. He wanted the limbs with the most leaves, for if it started to rain, he'd have more coverage. He got 5 splinters in the process, but his housing was as complete as it would be for the night. The wild berry juice irritated his tender hands, but his body felt stronger after he ate several handfuls of raspberries. He tightly wrapped up his fruit breakfast and used his jacket as a pillow. He lay on the ground, looking up at the broken branches, feeling just as broken from his roots. His muscles were sore, but it was nothing compared to his splitting migraine. He sat wondering how this could happen so quickly. One slip mysteriously wiped out the memory of his family. The boy felt he'd rather forget the word than know he had one somewhere that he couldn't find. He was getting ready to yell at the top of his lungs, but the tiredness kicked in, and the calming sound of the wind picked up. The leaves prevented the lost boy from chilling. He fell asleep speedily and dreamt of a crimson cardinal perched on a picnic table. The boy was sitting there, and on the table was a basket with raspberry jam and a pile of buttered toast. The table was in a flat prairie with tiny white and blue flowers peppered here and there, in large groups in the swaying tall grass. The bird appeared to clear his throat and began to talk. "Are you all right, little lad?" "I'm scared," said the boy. "Oh, I've been scared before. One morning, I was sleeping peacefully, and a cat jumped on me on my nest from above. I got so scared that I fell out of my home and forgot I could fly. Did you hurt yourself when you landed on the ground?" he asked the cardinal. "Welp, it didn't feel pleasant, I could tell you." "Let's eat. I've flown a long way, and eating raspberry jam always helps me feel better when exhausted. It might do you some good, too." So they ate silently for a few minutes, and the boy noticed a glass pitcher of ice water appeared on the table with 2 cups. "Oh, I could use a swig," said the cardinal, and so the boy poured him a cup. "So why are you scared?" said the cardinal. "I don't remember my name, who my parents are, or anything about my life." "That would be unfortunate indeed, wouldn't it? Well, how about we devise a name for you and solve at least one issue?" The boy looked down at his slice of toast, deep in thought. "How do you like the name Uriah?" the bird said after a long time of waiting. Before the boy could speak, everything around him grew foggy, and he awoke to the sound of chirping birds and the bright sunlight cutting through the stick roof. He went down to the river and got a drink. In the water's reflection, he noticed a severe bruise, a substantial purple mark above his right eye. He put cold water on it, and it helped some. A loud noise cracked the sky and made him jump. "Who's there?" he shouted. "Hello?" No reply. He decided to go in the direction of the loud boom. It made him feel uneasy to see what made the noise, but it made him feel more nervous not to know what it was. Boom! Another one closer than the first alerted birds in the nearby trees, and they flew away in fast, feather-flapping chirps. "Hello? Please help me." He had no idea of what he was running toward. He felt like it couldn't get any worse than it already was. Each step made the soreness in his head worse. His legs started to ache, for he didn't feel like slowing his stride. But the thought of seeing another person made tears fall. His heart pounded, his lungs burned, and he tripped over a log and scraped his elbows on the dirt. He got up and kept running. It felt like another dream to hear from another person. The boy got closer and started to see an opening and saw where the lake connected to the river. He saw 2 men by the lake holding shotguns. "We're on safety, don't worry. We're just hunting for ducks. What happened to your head? Let me get you an ice pack." The boy walked with the 2 men, and the older one held his hand as he took him to a small cabin away from the lake. "My son downed 2 quackers, but I can't see like I used to, so I don't shoot unless I know it's a birdie and not an airplane." "It's a real problem," said the younger man. "He's set in his ways and doesn't want to stop hunting because good Grandpa Wilbur taught him to shoot when he was probably about your age." The younger man leaned forward and quietly finished with a concerned look. "He's about as blind as a sack of potatoes. When he forgets his glasses at home, and that's common, he doesn't find it necessary to return and get them." The older man was skinny and had a long gray beard and denim overalls with knee patches. His face looked weathered from many winters. The younger man had a yellow cable-knit sweater and a raccoon hat. He had no beard, but whiskers peppered his broad jawbones. The boy thought they were very kind. Of course. The only communication the boy had known was a talking red bird in his dream. These men seemed about as welcoming as the bird. "My name is Lloyd, and this is my son Walter. We have lived near this lake for years, and it is uncommon for us to come across others. So what makes you come this way?" The boy had so much, yet so little to explain. "Sometimes I have a story that I'm eager to share, but when it's told, I can tell by looking at the listener's face that the story is missing vital details." They welcomed the boy into the cabin, and the older man took some pieces of ice from somewhere downstairs and crushed up the ice in a pack. His son made a pot of coffee and poured the boy a cup, as he sat on a cushioned rocking chair, facing a smoldering fire in the middle of a small cobblestone chimney. The two men sat patiently, waiting for the boy's story. "Thank you. The ice is helping, but I'm not sure what I think of this hot brown stuff." "Oh, I saved that coffee for when I have guests, but since it is uncommon for us to have visitors, I'd say it's gotten a little dusty. So, how about you tell us your story?" The boy sighed and smiled, feeling better and replenished, but he didn't know how to explain the situation. "Well, I fell in the river, not sure what part, and I woke up on the sand with ringing in my ears and a sore head. I may sound crazy, but the river gobbled up my memories of my family." The two men looked worried at each other. "Do you remember your name?" asked Walter. It's a story in which a young boy's life began again, but instead of being born with an infant's cry, he was born with fear and a sense that he was in deep trouble. But he strangely felt relieved that he knew something. He was afraid. What did the cardinal call him in his dream? Maybe he'd have some relief if he could call himself something. "Uriah. My name is Uriah," he said, pleased to hear him say it. He liked the way it sounded. He thought it sounded like the title of a brave man. It helped lift his spirit. "I'm Uriah. I'm going to find my family and save them from this terrible sadness," he thought to himself. "Well, Uriah, we have to find out who your mother and father are because I'm sure they are worried about you, even if you don't know it. We will walk the river's edge, and hopefully your family hasn't hiked far," said Lloyd, as he grabbed a tin box of sugar cubes and plopped a few in the boy's coffee. Lloyd put a knit cap on Uriah's head, and the three walked outside, searching for the boy's family. He hoped with every passing step he would waken at home, before the word meant more than just a place away from the wind. If Uriah couldn't reach out to recall the warmth the home brings, what kept him walking through the unclear darkness, instead of giving up under the weight, Uriah couldn't name. Years later, he'd learned that what he carried on his tiny shoulders was the most potent desire for sonship. I believe every human and animal and every poor beetle that has fallen on its backside and can't return to its feet without assistance comes to moments where they would like to be comforted by their parents. Uriah closed his eyes briefly and held on to the image of his God-given responsibility to be a mother and father's son, a puzzle piece of priceless worth, separated by the lack of recognition of what puzzle the piece belongs to. Part 2. Walter, Lloyd, and Uriah hiked to the forest till afternoon. Uriah's legs had gotten tired, and he sat on a stump and sighed, looking down at a line of marching ants hauling tiny bits of food to their dirt palace. Lloyd put his hand on the boy's shoulder and offered another sugar cube. "We'll find them, and when we do, I bet their faces will give your memory a joyous good morning, and you won't have to see that river again. And they'll probably give you a better treat than expired coffee." Uriah liked Lloyd. Something about the older man made him very welcome and even spoiled. Later in his life, he'd come to realize that Lloyd had the presence of a professional grandfather. I propose that you consider not only avoiding the very edge of an angry river, but also avoiding every stranger who lives in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. This particular story is a significant example of a miracle, that the boy had found such a person with his son. It's best to remember to keep close to your parents in unfamiliar surroundings so that they can keep you safe. Poor Uriah would say the same thing. Those ants are carrying what appears to be bits of graham crackers, which means somebody has to be camping close or hasn't left long ago," said Walter, as he crouched down to the ground, examining the insects closely, like Sherlock Holmes unraveling a mysterious case. If only there were a Sherlock book in which he solves the mystery of a boy who needs to get back to his parents, but can't remember what they looked like. But Walt was the man for the job. He loved a good book of unclear outcomes, and when the end of the book was even better than he imagined, he hoped with every rising thought that he could find out how far this boy floated down the river and how long he was unconscious on the sand. The answers were impossible to find, from what it seemed. Chocolate and marshmallows might be around here too. Nobody brings only graham crackers to a campfire. You'll be pretty miserable without even the smell of chocolate, shouted Uriah, his eyes wide, searching for what he could fortunately remember. He fell to the ground beside Walter and shadowed his actions. They walked a short distance, no more than 20 yards, and found something that made Uriah's heart stand still. A stone fire ring, but no smoke. The ring held cold ash, pitch black, and no speck of light, like the motionless hope in the boy's heart. Cold as a winter's night. He spotted a box of graham crackers, several like broken glass speckling the ground around the box. He picked up the box and ate a cracker, sweet like honey and a hint of vanilla. He enjoyed it very much, but the box didn't contain what he was looking for. The three looked around the flattened ground and found a small red tent under an old oak tree with tarp doors flapping in the breeze. They looked inside and saw that a sleeping bag was laying there, with a pillow and a backpack in the middle of the floor, with a note taped to the top handle that read, "Our loved son." The three looked down at the note as Uriah unfolded it with shaking hands. He read aloud, "If you're reading this, we're sorry we upset you the other day. We didn't realize you were this upset and would love to talk about it when you're ready. We have always been so very proud of you and are grateful to have you as a son. We love you so much and hope to discuss your upcoming birthday plans soon. Mom and Dad." The note slipped from his hands and gently landed on the sleeping bag. "My mom and dad left me all alone. After writing this to me, this doesn't make any sense," he cried out and fell down into the chilly pillow. Lloyd sat near his feet, looked through the backpack, and said, "Maybe you have a picture of your family in this backpack, or hopefully their phone numbers. You're right. This situation isn't making sense to us either. But when is it acceptable to quit, all because you have questions? Let's keep going and try to focus on one question at a time, or else your tiny brain will explode. Let's focus on finding a phone number or photo. Having one or both of those things will be extremely helpful." Lloyd spoke calmly, even though he began to worry about what might have happened to the boy's family. But worries never cleared a single room. Worries always make a point to magnify a problem or difficulty, or even something that isn't there, like a false alarm. While you're on vacation, parked by a beautiful landscape, you're afraid you can't find your keys, but the surprise and fear blurred the fact that the keys were in the car's ignition. So Lloyd took a long, deep breath and closed his eyes. He put his hand on his chest and felt his heart rate slow down slightly. Maybe the boy's parents were only just behind the river's bend. Maybe. Just maybe. They ate in the tent, but Uriah didn't have much appetite. He looked at the note without blinking until his eyes went out of focus. "Hey lad, come take a look at this. I found a slip of paper in the front pocket of your backpack. It has a phone number. I don't have a wireless phone, but let's run to my cabin and call right away. Uriah grabbed the backpack and stuffed the pillow in it, rolled up the sleeping bag, and used a bit of rope from his bag to fasten the sleeping bag onto his pack. Walter thought it was a good idea to leave the tent there and write another note explaining the boy's unfortunate story, hoping that his parents would come back to find it and feel relieved if they found it before the three walked back to the cabin and called the number. The afternoon sun shone through pink clouds, a long wavy band of airy mist reaching out from the far east to the west. Wild flowers were open and let in the sunshine as they flourished with their dewdrops sprinkling the vibrant grass underneath with a drink. The pinkish off-white hues in the sky made the trees appear warmer in color. Leaves shone little hints of yellow and orange, which would soon fade away from green as autumn approached. It was a beautiful day, though Uriah wasn't paying attention to the scenery. He was paying attention to the hopes that he might hear his parents' voice soon. He so hoped that hearing them speak would bring up memories of them, memories deep inside the library of his mind. I read a book about the value of being yourself. It was a good book, but I couldn't tell you a single sentence from the book. I remember loving it, but I couldn't recall what the book cover looked like. It's somewhere in my collection of books, but its wisdom is out of my reach. The chances that my dog ripped it to pieces are pretty high. It was dinner time by the moment the three arrived back to the cabin, and they had gathered numerous sore muscles. Lloyd opened the door and cracked his tired back before stepping inside. He walked to the phone hanging on the kitchen wall and dialed the number. "Maybe it'd be better if you answered," said Lloyd, as he gave the phone over to Uriah. The boy heard the old phone's crackling beep, 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 and then scramble noises on the other line. "Hello?" he said, with a shaken voice. "Hello," said a static, muffled voice. "This is Edward Cardinal. May I ask who's calling?" Part 3. Something about the voice on the other line sounded highly familiar to Uriah, like the bird in his dream. "This is Uriah." There was a long pause before he heard Mr. Cardinal's shoes tapping the wood floor in a sprint. There was a short conversation on the other end, but he couldn't hear them. The phone made crackling noises again, and he heard a woman crying. "Uriah James Cardinal? Is that you? Are you okay? Where on earth are you? Why did you run away from us? You better explain yourself before I lose it. I swear, and you know I'm not particularly eager to cuss, unless it's a good reason. I will ground you from your television, and even from the privilege of going outside for a year and a half if you don't show up in 10 minutes or less. Less would be much better for my mental health." The boy heard Mr. Cardinal say, "Here's your tea, darling," and heard drawn-out intervals of sipping, and in between the sounds of drinking tea were whispers of curse words, which I'd best not repeat. Uriah couldn't think of anything to say to his mother and father, except for telling the story of the river, but he didn't want to mention that he couldn't remember them. But how could he possibly leave that part of the story out? All Uriah could do was cry while hearing his mother and father. He got sick of telling the river story, but for this last time, he decided to take a deep breath and tell the entire tale without leaving out the most painful details. His parents cried and sobbed by the time he finished telling them everything. His father cleared his throat and began to explain to him why they left the campsite without him. "We looked for you for hours. till it was too dark to see under the thick trees. We returned to the campsite and asked the tour guide if he would tell the train conductor to hold off on departure until we found you. So everyone on the train looked for you the next day. The train conductor lost patience in us and told us we had an hour or he'd leave without us. So we looked for you for 2 days and a half and prayed you were following the train tracks home. You probably don't remember, but you didn't want to go on the train ride because you were scared of the loud noise. But after your mom and I promised you that we would give you something extra special for your birthday, you decided to be brave and faced your fear of loud trains. You ended up loving the ride through the miles of farmland and hills with sheep and horses. And when the train arrived, you were so excited to explore the woods and see the giant red pines and elk that you didn't even help me set up your tent. His father laughed and kept telling him the story. Then, when I finished making your s'mores, that's when we lost you. Well, Uriah's father explained. His mother called the train station and tried to get train tickets back to the forests by the river as soon as possible. But they told her the train had already left that day, and the next train tour would take place in a week. She asked if she could pay for a train ticket for her son, and he'd take the train home under a caretaker's supervision. She returned to where her husband was seated and told him and their son the plan. And after your train ride, we can give you your birthday gift and see a doctor and a professional counselor after this hullabaloo. Uriah looked at Walter and Lloyd and twirled the phone cord in his fingers, deep in thought. Can you buy more train tickets, please? I wouldn't have found my backpack or had a chance to call you without the help of these two fellows. Lloyd shook his head and mouthed the word without saying no, but Uriah pretended not to notice. May I talk to these friends of your son? Mr. Cardinal asked. He handed the phone to Lloyd, and Lloyd smiled down at him. The boy had noticed Lloyd's smile, tired, yet sincerely at peace. He didn't see all the wrinkles and shadows under his eyes until now. Lloyd looked like it was far past his bedtime, but Lloyd also glanced at Uriah with an injured sadness behind his red eyes. Lloyd whispered on the phone, Hello, this is Lloyd Joseph Andrews. Your son is a wonderful kid. He has a nasty bruise on his head, and I'd recommend getting a doctor to check it out immediately. I would have taken him myself, but there are no doctors for hundreds of miles. Yes, I gave him ice and some coffee. I'll make dinner shortly. I hope it is okay with you that he had coffee. I just thought the warm stuff might help settle his rattled nerves. Of course, you're very welcome. We will gladly get him to the train station. When will your boy's train arrive? All right, perfect. No thank you will be necessary. Please, finish your tea, Mrs. Cardinal, and rest assured, we will get Uriah to the train station, and you'll be together again. Goodbye. Yes, you both have a great night as well. Part 4. The train will arrive at 7:30 in the morning. Let's make some dinner and get some sleep. How about I make French toast for dinner and breakfast tomorrow? He told the boy to grab 3 eggs, milk, and homemade maple syrup from the refrigerator. Walter got into the cabinet for vanilla extract, cinnamon, nutmeg, and baking powder, while Lloyd cut a loaf of freshly baked bread. He put the ingredients in a large bowl and whisked them together. Lloyd felt incredibly pleased everything was coming together, and the boy had gotten word from his family. Although he felt sad that he had only known the boy for a day, yet it felt like a long adventure trying to solve the young boy's problem that made Lloyd feel like he mattered and could help someone in need. Sometimes, when you or I meet a kind and gentle-hearted person, we'd like them to stay by our side, even if you know they must get back home, and you must endure the pain of missing their company as you ponder into your black coffee, wondering how long the pain would last. He decided to get up early the next morning. He woke Uriah, but he fell back asleep, enjoying the couch far more than sleeping on the grass and sticks on a hill. Lloyd carried Uriah to the truck, clipped him in, and put a fleece blanket over his tiny lap. To keep Uriah from waking, he tried to miss every bumpy pothole in the windy, hilly roads that overlapped the broad mountainous landscape under the yawning early sunrise. As they approached the train station, fog blanketed the soft green farmlands on both sides, and Uriah woke up, looking at the sun. "I hope my house has a sunrise like that," said sleepy-eyed Uriah. Walter looked at the sky and the rising sun over the flat prairie, dotted with low clusters of blue wildflowers, with yellow centers called forget-me-nots, showing themselves just above the morning haze, swirling in the ocean of grass, tossing in the gusts of wind. Memory is a strange thing. I often think about what my life would be like if I couldn't remember the parts of my life when my heart was miserable, submerged in pain. We like to label stories before we read the whole thing. I've made my wrong first impressions of people time and time again. I have been angry with difficult people, hiding their hurts that I didn't realize. Our world likes to assume it knows the whole story, because it is painless to say, "I know what you're going through," before you ever have the uncommon decency to sit down and hear the story of others. Something beautiful happens when you and I say to others, "I'd like to hear your story," and there is no need to butter up the dreadful chapters. If I could not remember the painful events life brings, I couldn't remember the lessons learned from holding on to my blessings through days that didn't feel like blessings. Nobody wishes to stay in those agonizing days unless you are a masochist. But uniquely, pain is like the fog that sometimes covers the flowers. It can blur the beauty you're familiar with, but unfold a new perspective on the way you look at your blessings. With eyes washed with tears, I stared joy in the face. A dark cloud over my life cleared away by my lightened heart, reawakened by the realization of its priceless worth. God, I hope with every fiber of my heart that the person reading this knows that their heart beats for more than just a reason. Understanding that your life is unbelievably valuable is far beyond the importance of discovering your destiny. Lloyd's heart beat loudly and excitedly as he drove the boy nearer and nearer to Uriah's home. Even if Uriah didn't remember his mother and father, Lloyd believed that his parents had an unbelievably broad view of his worth. I hope your parents have a wonderful picture of your worth as well, and you have a view of theirs. As the three got closer and closer to the train station, they saw each other from a different perspective than when they found the lost boy and when he found the two men. They saw that you should not assume a life story based on first impression. Maybe someone you come across may look tired and drained. Perhaps it is because they are having trouble finding their family. Or maybe it is because they are cold from falling into an angry river and bashed their head on the river's sharp and unpleasant rocks. Lloyd's truck rolled into the large parking lot of the train station. Uriah looked up at the giant, old, well-preserved Victorian brick building with its sea-foam green oval windows lining the tall rectangle roof, which was slanted inward, giving each the windows tiny rooftops to fill in the space where the roof tapered to a point, like a church steeple. But this one had a substantial square clock instead of a church bell under the very top of the steeple high above the wide-eyed boy. He looked at Lloyd's wrist and noticed he wore a silver watch with golden hour and minute hands. Lloyd saw him admiring the timepiece. This was a gift from my wife. She loved time, all the moments of every day. Even if a day held hardships, I look at this watch and see it tick, 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 to help me not forget that every moment I'm here matters, even if I'd rather be in a more admirable situation, free of discomfort. Because of her, I see things differently. Part 5. A strange thing happens when you're around family members or friends who like things you find revolting. Not always, but after time, you don't mind those kinds of food or drinks, or even difficulties like talking in front of large groups, mainly because they remind you of your loved ones. I considered peanut butter the nastiest, most popular spread in all America. My sister-in-law, Jordan, loves peanut butter. I used to hide her jar of peanut butter to save her from the horrible stuff. But after my time of being a villain, plotting to stop my sister's peanut butter obsession, I found myself in a moment of weakness, and I tried some peanut butter. Somehow, it didn't taste like I remembered. I found it interesting, but not revolting. Now, I happen to have the popular spread almost every day, and have probably gotten more obsessed with it than my sister-in-law. Because of her, I see things differently. The three walked through the heavy artistic steel entry doors to step into a massive space of cement pillars that went up to the ceiling, and bright yellow lights spiraled down each of the dozens of pillars, and commotion of railways with engines huffing and puffing out smoke from tall metal chimneys. People hollered out things from the train windows and leaned out of train doorways, shouting out orders and things to the numerous well-dressed gentlemen with trays of food, carts of lumber, and even a trolley full of suitcases stacked to the stars. In the very center of the vast building was a little circular cement structure with a long glass panel with 5 round metal plates with holes. Behind the glass were 5 people wearing expensive green suit coats with brass buttons and a hat shaped like a steam engine. Lloyd told Walter to sit with Uriah in the rows of comfortably furnished benches beside old lamps that crackled and snapped with glowing firelight. Uriah watched in astonishment as colossal trains slowly pushed themselves out of the building. He watched the passengers or cargo box cars gradually pick up speed until the train entirely left the building, and the bright sun from the openings in the wall hit the boy in the eyes. Lloyd returned with a train ticket and handed it to Uriah. "It'd be best if you keep it safe in a pocket," said Lloyd, looking a bit sad. "What's wrong?" asked the boy, who had hoped that the man had gotten 2 more train tickets and put them in his own pocket. "The more time I spend with you, lad, I know I will find more pain in letting you go. Your parents need you back, and they don't know us, but they said you'll be under the care of someone they hired. If they asked me to take up the duty, I'd gladly say yes. But they told me on the phone to drop you off at the train station and nothing more, and that is what I'll do. And long train rides always hate my spine, and my spine always hated them." Lloyd tried to make Uriah laugh, but instead, he ran to Lloyd and gave him a tight hug, tears streaming down his face, hoping to be stronger than the man if he tried to break free. There, my friend. Don't forget to remember. Your family is always welcome to come to my house, and better coffee will be there next time." "All aboard!" the train conductor shouted, while ringing a bell attached to the train. "I'm scared. I want you both to come with me," Uriah quietly said, through all his emotions. "Sometimes You have to stand up to your fears and tell them to get a ticket to the furthest destination from wherever you're standing, Lloyd said, not brushing the boy's tears away, but letting him not hide his completely understandable feelings. We can walk to the train with you. It is a very nice train, and they will bring you a good lunch and dinner, said Walter. And as they got closer to the train, the boy found a bit of bravery in every step. Even though the sadness was impossible to hide, he found a little bit of light in his heart. He felt uniquely excited for his next adventure. Stepping onto the train was the scariest part, but walking inside was not at all what he expected. It was not noisy, but peacefully quiet, and old music played through the speakers. He found his seat and looked out the window. He smiled at his friends waving at him. His stomach hurt, but it settled when a lady pushing a cart asked him if he wanted food or a beverage. He sat there eating a warm croissant, dipping it into raspberry jam, with a cup of steaming coffee. The coffee wasn't bitter or old like his friend's coffee was. It was smooth and had hints of milk chocolate, walnuts, and sweet orange. The train rumbled and made a loud noise, like a giant steaming kettle. The boy looked at Lloyd and Walter. He knew he'd miss them dearly, but he felt better knowing that he could hold on to something priceless that the river didn't take from him. In his pocket, he noticed something that wasn't there before, entering the train station. He pulled out a picture of Lloyd, Walter, and Lloyd had his arm around a woman. On the back of the photo was written, "Our house is complete." Lloyd didn't put the entry door on with the suitable screws. The door fell off in the night, and a raccoon made itself comfortable on the sofa. In the morning, Lloyd found it listening to his John Denver vinyl in his rocking chair. Who knew that raccoons had good taste in music? Under the writing, it read, Esther Andrews, 1976. Must be Lloyd's wife, Uriah thought. He tucked the picture back into his pocket. Who the heck is John Denver? He asked himself. The train rolled from the station, and the sun's rays burst into the locomotive's hall windows. He was going back home. I can't describe how he was feeling on the train. I can't describe a feeling I have never felt, the feeling I get inside my chest. When I've been gone from the town, I know better than the back of my hand, the anticipation of being there at last. The roads lead me to cornfields and farmland, and the pavement carries me through low rolling hills, with herds of deer crossing at the worst possible times. I pass probably 6 a week. The road eventually brings me to where I cruise on a dirt road that holds my home. Uriah had lost the enjoyable details of his town that visitors would overlook. The definition of home is a place where one or more lives. I don't exactly feel like I'm living when I'm not home, but I'm just surviving, only getting by. Even if I'm on vacation, exploring beautiful places, to me, nothing is better than being wherever my family is. My home is not a place. I live when I'm with my family. That's home to me, and I don't wish upon anyone on earth to be alone. It is a nice thing to ask your family or good friends to remind you of your stories with them, even if you remember them vividly. I've always enjoyed hearing from friends and family members about their perspectives on shared memories and places we've gone. It gives me a sense of returning a second time and seeing the story from a larger perspective. You can tell a lot about someone by how they tell you a story. Uriah asked his family to retell his forgotten story. The memories might not have come back, but he had new memories of his father and mother patiently telling him all the events and re-meeting friends from the 7 years he lost. They brought him to his favorite park and told him that he would sit on the top of the iron slide gazing at the sky and call out the clouds that looked like different things. How did God make all this goodness out of nothing? he would ask. He didn't make it out of nothing, son. He made everything out of love, his father said. His father held his hand as they walked to the welcome mat of his unknown home. His parents hugged him as they cried tears of joy. He felt their hearts beating next to his and never forgot the pain of crying by himself in the forest by the river. It was far better to cry with company. It was the end of the pain, but not the end of the boy's journey. Years later, he went back to the river. Looking into the water, he saw himself not feeling an ounce of anger in him. No regret for throwing that rock, because you can say that the throw landed him in a place where his pain revealed the beauty in the depths of struggling not to give up on coming home. The end.